In America's collective memory, Walter Brennan always appears as a kind old man, small in stature, with a toothless smile, a hoarse voice, and eyes that shine with the quiet trust of a man who has seen it all. On screen, he was the embodiment of America's grandpa, the sensible farmer, the loyal friend, the gentle old father. In the real McCoys, he smiled warmly under a wooden porch, said grace before dinner, and spoke in simple sentences that made audiences feel at peace. The best thing in life is to see others live right. Nearly half a century in the business, over 200 roles, and 3 Academy Awards. A record still unbroken. From the cold lands of Massachusetts to the cinematic plains of Texas, Walter Brennan touched the hearts of millions of Americans through his simplicity. He didn't need glamour. It was humility itself that made him shine. In Hollywood, where fame comes and goes like the wind, Brennan seemed to be the only one who never had to pretend. The studio lights fade. The man quietly steps out of character, removes the fake beard, and looks at himself in the mirror. And then, was he truly as kind as everyone believed? Behind that warm smile was a soul wary of the world, a man who believed in justice, but a justice of the past, where order was maintained through fear. The older he grew, the louder the world became and the smaller his voice sounded. And in that silence, fear began to speak. He was an actor who made audiences cry for his compassion. Yet in real life, he sometimes closed his heart to that same compassion. Perhaps no one else in Hollywood's history carried such a stark contradiction within himself. On one side, the light of art. On the other, the darkness of extreme conviction. From the soldier returning from war, to the Western hero, to America's old man, Walter Brennan journeyed through nearly a century, witnessing a changing America and seeing himself get lost within that change. Could it be that sometimes people become cruel, not because they're evil, but because they fear disappearing in a new world? How could a man who once touched millions of hearts become a symbol of hatred? This is not the story of a villain, nor merely the story of a Hollywood legend. It is the story of a man standing within a transforming America, a man who once made the world believe in goodness, then found himself lost in the darkness of fear and resentment. As the last light of old Hollywood slowly fades, the silhouette of one man remains, gentle yet haunting. Walter Brennan, the man who made Hollywood ask itself, can talent redeem a soul overshadowed by darkness? Walter Andrew Brennan was born on July the 25th, 1894, in the city of Lynn, Massachusetts, a coastal industrial town north of Boston, known for its shoe factories and mechanical workshops. There, on cold winter mornings, frost blanketed the wooden rooftops, and the people lived reserved, slow-paced lives typical of New England. His father, William John Brennan, was a mechanical engineer working for factories around Lynn. He was of Irish descent, having immigrated to America in the late 19th century, bringing with him a steadfast faith in hard work, discipline, and Catholicism. William was known for being stern and quiet, living by a simple creed: if a man does not work, he does not deserve to live. His mother, Margaret Elizabeth Flanagan, was also Irish. She had once worked as a seamstress and, after marriage, stayed home to raise their 3 children. She was gentle, devout, and often told her children, "God blesses those who endure patiently." In the small Brennan home in the working-class district near the docks, the church bells rang each morning, and the scent of machine oil mingled with the faint aroma of candles from Sunday Mass. Walter grew up in a solemn, disciplined atmosphere. Every meal began with prayer, and every evening his father taught him arithmetic, how to repair a tool, and how to stay honest, even when no one is watching. From a young age, Walter was quiet, more of an observer than a talker. He disliked noise but possessed a sharp curiosity. His father wanted him to become an engineer, believing it was a real profession, while everything else, especially art, was the fantasy of the idle. Walter feared his father, yet admired him deeply. To the boy, his father embodied discipline and justice, ideals that would follow him for the rest of his life. When Walter was about 10, the family moved to Swampscott, a peaceful seaside town. The cold sea and cobblestone streets became the deepest part of his childhood memory. He would sit for hours by the seawall, watching ships leave the harbor, imagining faraway lands. But whenever his father caught him, he would simply say, "Don't dream. The world isn't made for dreamers." Walter attended Ringe Technical High School in Cambridge, a prestigious technical school where students were trained to become engineers or skilled workers. He was good at math and mechanics, but what truly fascinated him were the drama club's plays. When he stood on that small stage, transformed into someone else, he felt freer than anywhere else in his life. Still, Walter never dared tell his father. William Brennan considered acting a foolish pastime. Once, upon hearing his son recite lines in front of a mirror, he merely shook his head and said, "You were born to work, not to pretend." That sentence seared itself into Walter's memory, becoming both a quiet wound and a lifelong motivation to prove that he could pretend so well it became real. In the early 20th century, America was entering a period of rapid industrialization. Steam trains and new factories appeared across Massachusetts, bringing both progress and harshness. In that environment, Walter absorbed two opposing values at once: his father's cold practicality and his mother's gentle faith. He believed in morality and work, but he also began to fear everything that lay outside the boundaries of order. In 1914, at the age of 20, Walter graduated from high school. His father wanted him to apply to an engineering institute, but the outbreak of World War I changed everything. Waves of patriotism swept across America, and Brennan, like many young men from New England, enlisted in the Army. He was assigned to the 101st Field Artillery Regiment of the American Expeditionary Forces. On the French front, he served for 2 years under brutal conditions. During a battle near the Lorraine region, Walter was exposed to mustard gas, which severely damaged his lungs and vocal cords. His voice became permanently hoarse, high-pitched, and slightly tremulous, a lifelong after-effect. Yet that very injury would later become his signature voice, instantly recognizable to audiences even before his face appeared on screen. When the war ended, Walter returned home to Massachusetts, carrying medals and a voice forever altered. His father greeted him with a firm handshake, no hug, few words, only one sentence. "Now you know, the world isn't for the weak." His mother simply placed her hand over his chest and whispered, "God kept you alive, which means he still has work for you to do." Walter didn't know what that work was. He was no longer the young man he had been, nor was he still a soldier. Inside him stirred a vague echo, a yearning to live differently, and a fear of a world changing too fast. That boy from Massachusetts could not yet know that those cold years by the New England Sea, the stern discipline of his father and the ascetic faith of his mother, had split his soul in two. One half drawn toward the light of morality and order, the other half sinking into a fear of all things new. And that very division would follow him for the rest of his life, from being one of Hollywood's most beloved actors to a man imprisoned by his own convictions. After the war, Walter Brennan returned to Massachusetts with a weakened body, a roughened voice, and a soul burdened by a deep sense of displacement. America was changing. The returning soldiers were greeted with banners and brass bands, but few knew how they struggled to find themselves again. Brennan was no exception. He tried many jobs: reporter for a local Boston paper, carpenter, ditch digger, and even a bank courier. Yet none of them made him feel truly alive. Amid the monotony, part of his youth still remembered the stage. Occasionally, when passing by the city theater, he would stop to gaze at the glowing posters. But that dream was now buried under the dust of reality. He had to make a living. In the early 1920s, Brennan entered the real estate business. With his discipline and technical knowledge, he found quick success. Within a few years, he had saved a considerable sum. But in 1925, the housing market collapsed. The entire industry fell apart, and everything he had built vanished. After one summer, Brennan went from being a man of means back to having nothing. That failure forced him to confront his father's greatest fear: failure and uselessness. In despair, he began thinking about leaving America altogether. At one point, he even considered moving to Guatemala to grow pineapples and start over. But fate opened a different road. An old friend, who had once heard him speaking while selling houses, remarked that he had the soul of an actor. The expressive manner, the gestures, the rare confidence. The friend urged him to go to California, where the film industry was booming, and try his luck as an extra. Brennan took the advice, but before leaving, he married Ruth Carolyn Wells, the woman he had loved since his days working at the bank. The Wells family disapproved of the marriage. They considered pursuing a career in film reckless. But Ruth believed in him. After a modest wedding, the couple set out west in an old car, bound for California. The road from Massachusetts to California stretched more than 4,000 kilometers. Along the journey, they often slept in the car, stopping at cheap roadside inns when they could. One stormy night, the car's roof was ripped away by wind, rain pouring inside. Ruth simply opened her umbrella in the front seat, looked at her husband, and laughed. Years later, Brennan recalled, "In that moment, I knew I could go anywhere, as long as she was beside me." California greeted them with scorching sun, dusty roads, and long lines outside studio gates. Thousands of young men and women crowded together, each chasing the chance to become somebody. Hollywood in the 1920s was a mixture of dream and delusion. Behind the spotlights were rows of shanty houses, where nameless actors lived side by side, waiting for a phone call that might never come. Brennan joined that crowd. With his short stature, rugged face, and hoarse voice, he didn't look like a leading man, but there was something authentic about him that people remembered. In the early years, he did anything: background actor, prop handler, sometimes even camera driver. The pay was only a few dollars a day, just enough for him and Ruth to scrape by in a tiny Los Angeles apartment. Some days, He stood for hours outside the studio gates just to be picked as an extra. Yet Brennan never gave up. He watched closely how actors moved, how directors signaled, how cameras operated. He learned by sight and patience. Then a small accident changed his appearance forever. During a stunt scene in 1932, he fell and struck his face, breaking several front teeth. Instead of being ashamed, he turned it into an advantage. When playing old men or poor Western settlers, he would simply remove his dentures. "No one ages faster than I do," he joked half seriously. That quirk made him stand out among thousands of extras and helped audiences believe the characters he portrayed were real. Between 1925 and 1935, Brennan appeared in more than 30 films, most of them uncredited roles. He worked with major directors such as Howard Hawks, William Wyler, and Sam Goldwyn, names that would later define Hollywood's golden age. His turning point came with The Wedding Night, 1935, where he played a taxi driver. It was a minor role, but his blend of dry humor and sincerity caught the director's attention. He was soon invited to appear in Barbary Coast, also directed by Hawks. From there, Brennan's career began to take shape. He became known as a character actor, someone who transformed supporting roles into the soul of a film. He wasn't the hero or the romantic lead, but he was the one audiences believed was real. In Hollywood's glittering world, where everyone longed to shine, he chose instead to be quiet, still carrying the instincts of the engineer's son who believed in work, not in glory. Yet beneath that humility, something else was forming. With each rejection, each nameless role, Brennan grew convinced that Hollywood was a place where good men had to stay guarded, where trust was fragile and betrayal common. From that belief, a seed of suspicion began to grow, small, persistent, and destined to expand with the light of fame that was yet to come. By the time he turned 40, Brennan had spent nearly a decade just earning the right to have his name appear in the credits. But that long road had forged him. Disciplined, steadfast, and devoted to the idea that only order and absolute effort could secure one's place in a chaotic world. He didn't yet realize that as success finally approached, that same rigid belief would begin to distance him from the compassion that audiences saw on screen. Hollywood in the 1930s gleamed like a dream. In black and white theaters across America, audiences escaped the Great Depression through stories of heroes, love, and faraway lands. And in a quiet corner of the Goldwyn studio, a small, thin man with thinning hair, a hoarse voice, and a toothless smile prepared for his scene. Walter Brennan, then in his 40s, still just a supporting actor few remembered by name. But destiny always finds the patient. In Come and Get It, 1936, director William Wyler needed a supporting role. An old Swedish lumberjack, gentle, honest, and loyal. Brennan came to audition. When Wyler asked, "How do you plan to play him?" Brennan simply smiled, removed his dentures, and replied, "Maybe he doesn't need teeth." The whole crew burst into laughter, but moments later, when he spoke in his rough, trembling voice, Swan Bostrom seemed to come alive in the room. Few knew that the accident of 1932, when a horse's kick had shattered several of his front teeth, would become the turning point of his life. While others tried to hide their flaws, Brennan turned his into an acting tool. "I can age 20 years in 3 seconds, he joked. And indeed, just by taking out his dentures, he could transform instantly into someone old, simple, and profoundly human. That performance earned Brennan his first Academy Award, and the very first Oscar ever given for Best Supporting Actor. On stage, he said only one short line: "I didn't think I'd win. I just think the audience believed I was real." That simple sentence made the whole room rise in applause. 2 years later, in 1938, Brennan returned in Kentucky as an elderly horse breeder who devoted his life to his animals and grandchildren. This time, he needed no makeup. With his slightly limping walk, his raspy voice, and his warm yet weary eyes, he captured the audience completely. When the film premiered, newspapers called him the soul of working-class America, and once again, he was announced as the Oscar winner. Friends said he could hardly believe it. When told he had won, Brennan muttered, "Maybe they made a mistake." But that night, driving home, he stopped his car on Sunset Boulevard, looked at the flickering electric lights, and told his wife, "I guess my father wasn't wrong. People only respect those who work to the end." In 1940, he reunited with Gary Cooper, an old friend from their extra days. Cooper, now a major star, urged Brennan to try for the role of Judge Roy Bean in The Westerner. The character was unlike any Brennan had ever played, a man who upheld justice and crushed it when necessary. Brennan hesitated, but Cooper reassured him, "You don't have to play evil. Just play a man who believes he's right." And that was exactly what he did. On screen, Brennan's Roy Bean was both terrifying and pitiable, a man so rigid in his convictions that he stood utterly alone. The role earned him his third Oscar within just 4 years. When the results were announced, Gary Cooper, present in the audience, was the first to shake his hand. "You did what no one thought you could," Cooper whispered. Brennan only replied with a hoarse smile. 3 Oscars in a row stunned Hollywood. A supporting actor, not handsome, not young, not loud, had become the most awarded man in his category's history. Rumors spread that he had won through the votes of the Extras Union, those who once shared the same nameless background roles with him. The gossip grew so persistent that the Academy changed its voting rules in 1941, removing extras from the eligible pool. When asked about it, Brennan simply said, "Maybe they voted for me because I'm still one of them. I just stand a little closer to the light." Those words sounded plain, but revealed his lifelong creed, that a man's true worth lies in his diligence, not his fame. Yet every light casts a shadow. After his third victory, Brennan began to withdraw. He spoke little to the press, skipped parties, avoided alcohol, and often left ceremonies early. When a journalist once asked why he didn't enjoy his success, he answered, "I didn't come here to dance. I came here to work." 3 golden statues, dozens of acclaimed performances, and still, he remained solitary. Perhaps deep down, Brennan believed Hollywood was never sincere, that the world would soon move on and leave men like him behind. That feeling, equal parts pride and unease, began to take root in the heart of the man who had once made America weep for kindness. From 1936 to 1940, Walter Brennan rose from an anonymous extra to a legend. But amid the glitter of his trophies, he carried a quiet, growing fear that as the world changed, there would be no place left for men like him. And from that moment on, within the glow of triumph, a shadow began to form in his soul. Small at first, but strong enough to spread through the rest of his life. After 3 consecutive Oscars, Walter Brennan entered a new era of his career. From a forgotten supporting actor, he became a guarantee of authenticity for every Western film. Studios believed that as long as Brennan was in it, audiences would believe the story. Because he didn't act like the stars. He became the character. The 1940s marked America's entry into war, and Hollywood shifted as well. Many young actors enlisted, while Brennan, nearly 50 at the time, stayed behind, portraying fathers, mentors, and wise old friends, the kind of figures America needed during its darkest years. In Sergeant York, 1941, he played a poor, gentle father teaching his son about faith and honesty. The film was a massive success, and audiences began calling him the face of integrity. From My Darling Clementine, 1946, to Red River, 1948, Brennan continued to embody men of the West who had weathered life's storms. That hoarse voice, the slightly moist eyes, the kind but weary smile, all made him a symbol of a world slowly fading away. A world of old values, honor, and decency. Yet just as the image of the kind old man reached its peak, an inner conflict began to take shape within him. Brennan no longer believed in Hollywood. To him, it had become too noisy, too shallow, nothing like the place he once knew. In his eyes, 1950s Hollywood was a city of illusions. Where fame was bought and morality was merely dialogue, he chose to live quietly, avoiding the crowd. Among the young stars dressed in tuxedos and partying through the night, Brennan wore worn shirts, old khakis, drove a pickup truck, and went home early. He often said, "I've got nothing to prove. I just want to live right." Still, he kept working. By the late 1950s, as television began to rise, many film actors saw it as a step down, but Brennan saw opportunity. He accepted the role of Grandpa Amos McCoy in the television series The Real McCoys, 1957-1963. Unexpectedly, that role made him one of the most familiar faces in American households. Every evening, millions turned on their TVs to see him. The kind-hearted, stern but warm grandfather who always said what was right. His catchphrase, "Now, Luke boy," became part of American pop culture. He made viewers believe that goodness still had a place in a changing world. After filming, Brennan returned to his small home in Ventura Valley with his wife, Ruth. He raised chickens, tended his garden, and rarely attended industry parties. Friends said he had only a few hobbies: reading the Bible, listening to country music, and hunting. He lived more like a farmer than a movie star, and seemed content that way. Yet beneath that peace, something began to shift. He started to feel alienated from the world around him. Post-war America was changing. Old values were being challenged by anti-war movements, women's rights, and civil rights activism. For Brennan, raised in strict discipline and unwavering faith, these were signs of moral decay. He often complained that young people don't respect anyone anymore, and that America is losing its soul. That suspicion pushed him further inward. To the public, he remained the gentle old man of television, but in reality, he was growing conservative, distrustful, and difficult to approach. Many who worked with him on The Real McCoys recalled that Brennan was strict on set. He demanded punctuality, forbade swearing, and banned political talk. One screenwriter remembered, "He was exactly like his character, but if someone messed up, he could get truly angry." In the late 1950s, as America entered an era of optimism and innovation, Brennan held fast to his conviction that only traditional order and morality could save the nation. That belief made him a symbol of the old generation, respected, but increasingly out of step with the times. When The Real McCoys ended in 1963, Brennan had become a household name for millions. But behind the studio lights, he withdrew deeper into his private world. A world of outdated values he was determined to defend to the end. The man who once made America love him for his kindness now looked at society with suspicion. He felt that everything sacred was being erased, that his faith in order, in God, in morality, was being mocked. And when the world no longer resembled what he believed, he began to turn against it. That was the moment the light within him began to waver. From the man who once gave audiences faith, Walter Brennan was slowly becoming a man who had lost faith in the very world he'd once made people believe in. And from there, a new chapter began, one of doubt, extremity, and darkness. In 1963, the Real McCoys ended after 6 seasons. All of America had once loved Grandpa Amos, the gentle, straightforward man who always stood for what was right. But when the studio lights went dark, Walter Brennan returned to real life, where he was no longer the character the audience adored. And that was when the world around him began to change faster than ever before. The America of the 1960s was no longer the country Brennan knew. The civil rights movement was spreading. Anti-war protests erupted nationwide. Young people took to the streets, singers sang about freedom, women demanded equality. The values Brennan had believed in all his life, order, faith, discipline, were now being questioned. And to a man in his 70s, these weren't signs of awakening, but of chaos. Brennan began speaking more openly about politics, harshly, uncompromisingly. In interviews, he declared that this country is being infiltrated by communists and that the civil rights movement is just an excuse to overthrow America. At first, people dismissed it as the conservatism of an old man. But he grew increasingly consumed by these beliefs until they became an obsession. He joined far-right groups such as the John Birch Society, known for its fierce anti-communism, opposition to racial equality, and support for white nationalism. Brennan was convinced that every protest and every dissenting voice was the work of invisible hands from Moscow. In 1964, he spoke at Project Prayer in Los Angeles, an event protesting the Supreme Court's decision to remove prayer from public schools. Before an audience of more than 2,000, Brennan proclaimed, "If America stops praying, God will abandon us." The crowd cheered, but something had changed. The once warm voice that used to move audiences now sounded cold and hard. As time went on, Brennan struggled to distinguish between patriotism and fear. He no longer trusted the press, the government, or anyone who disagreed with him. When asked about the civil rights movement, he replied curtly, "If they're not happy, they should leave this country." His former colleague Everett Greenbaum, writer for The Real McCoys, later recalled, "Walter wasn't the man I used to know. He started speaking with anger, seeing anyone fighting for justice as an enemy. Sometimes I thought he'd lived as his character for so long, he couldn't find his way back to being himself." Rumors about Brennan's extremist remarks spread quickly through Hollywood, a community dominated by liberal thinkers. But he didn't care. He insisted the entire film industry was run by traitors. He built a fallout shelter on his Ventura County ranch, stocked with guns, food, and water. When friends asked why, he said only, "The day will come. I just don't want to be caught off guard." When Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968, Brennan was said to have smiled. A crew member from the Guns of Will Sonnet recalled that he couldn't hide his satisfaction. The story spread and caused outrage, but Brennan never denied it. He believed he was simply speaking the truth others were afraid to say. That same year, when Senator Robert F. Kennedy was shot dead, Brennan again appeared pleased. He claimed that Kennedy was a puppet of the communists and that his death was inevitable. Friends began to distance themselves. Hollywood turned silent toward him. But Brennan remained unmoved. He believed he was defending the real America, the America of his father, of God, of discipline. The world watched as one of the most beloved actors of the past 3 decades drifted away from the gentle image he had built. On screen, he was the kind-hearted grandfather. In life, he had become bitter, extreme, and capable of finding joy in another's death. And through it all lay a bitter truth. He still thought of himself as a good man. Brennan believed his loyalty to God and country was absolute, that his rigidity was necessary to preserve order. He didn't see that it was fear of change that had turned him into the opposite of what he once represented: compassion. When his final TV series, The Guns of Will Sonnet, 1967-1969, ended, audiences still loved him on screen. The aging father searching for his son, full of forgiveness and warmth. But no one knew that offset, he was sinking deeper into anger and endless conspiracy. Walter Brennan, the man who once made America believe in goodness, had become a man who no longer believed in anyone. In the final light of his career, he stood between 2 worlds: a glittering Hollywood he despised, and an America transforming beyond his recognition. And in that widening gap, he slowly disappeared, not from the screen, but from himself. By the early 1970s, Hollywood had changed completely. A new generation of filmmakers, Coppola, Scorsese, Altman, emerged with bold, rebellious movies filled with the hunger for freedom. Meanwhile, the old symbols of the Western era, those who once embodied honor and righteousness, were fading into the shadows. Amid these changes, Walter Brennan, now in his 70s, remained steadfastly anchored in the past. He withdrew from Los Angeles, settling with his wife, Ruth, the woman who had stood by him for more than half a century, on a 250-acre ranch in Moore Park, Ventura County. The ranch had horses, cattle, and rows of olive trees, but also a reinforced concrete bunker beneath the ground, a place Brennan believed would save him if doomsday ever came. He stocked guns, ammunition, water, and canned food, even keeping a handwritten list of people he considered trustworthy. Neighbors rarely saw him outside. He still read the Bible every morning and listened to the radio in the afternoons, but refused to watch modern television. To Brennan, everything broadcast on TV was communist propaganda. When asked about the new era, he would simply say, "I don't know what they're doing to this country, but it's not the America I grew up in." The louder the world became, the deeper he retreated into solitude. Occasionally, old friends from Hollywood tried to visit, but he refused to see them. They said Brennan feared being brainwashed. Perhaps, in truth, he only feared facing the reality that his time had passed. During this period, his health deteriorated noticeably. The lung disease, a lingering effect of mustard gas exposure during the war, returned to torment him. That hoarse, gravelly voice that had once made him famous now came out as shallow, broken breaths. Whenever he coughed, Ruth helped him sit up, gave him medicine, and quietly rubbed his back. The woman who had shared his entire journey never left his side. Though friends said their life together was not easy, too much silence, too little tenderness. In those frail days, Brennan kept a journal. A few pages were later found by his family after his death. One entry read, in trembling handwriting, "I lived right, but maybe I believed wrong." No one knows when he wrote it, after an illness or perhaps on a weary afternoon. But it was one of the rare moments when Walter Brennan seemed to question himself. Maybe near the end of his life, he realized that his absolute faith in order, in morality, in an unchanging America, had distanced him from what he once embodied most: compassion. In 1972, Brennan tried to return to the set for Disney's Herbie Rides again. But his failing health forced him to withdraw mid-production. His final completed work was Smoke in the Wind, released posthumously. In it, he played an aging Westerner living in seclusion, lonely and wistfully watching the world change. A role so close to his real life that few dared call it acting. On September 21, 1974, Walter Brennan took his last breath at a hospital in Oxnard, California. He was 80 years old. His funeral was simple: no celebrities, no media fanfare. Only his family, a few old friends, and colleagues from the real McCoys attended. He was buried at San Fernando Mission Cemetery, where the sea breeze drifted softly over the graves, like a final farewell. His tombstone bore only a single line: Walter Andrew Brennan, 1894-1974. No titles, no three-time Academy Award winner. A journalist once summarized his life with a single sentence: Walter Brennan died the way he lived, quietly, firmly, and without compromise. Perhaps that was true. Or perhaps buried deeper within that silence was the exhaustion of a man who had fought too long to defend a world that no longer needed his protection. When people look back at his hundreds of roles, the loyal friend, the father, the grandfather, they feel a quiet sadness. Because now they know the kind old man they loved on screen spent his real life fighting against the very change he could never understand. And perhaps, when the last light of that year's sunset fell over his Ventura ranch, Walter Brennan finally found what he had been searching for all his life: an absolute silence, free of argument and fear, leaving only the shadow of a man who once stood between two worlds: light and darkness. When Walter Brennan drew his final breath on an autumn morning in 1974, America barely noticed that one of the greatest icons of classic Hollywood had passed away. There was no grand funeral, no solemn eulogy, only a few family members, a handful of old friends, and the dry wind whispering through San Fernando Mission Cemetery. A glorious life ended in silence, simple, humble, just as he had lived. Yet Walter Brennan's legacy still stands firm, like a monument at the history of American cinema. Over more than 50 years in the industry, he appeared in over 230 films and television programs, working with nearly 100 directors, from William Wyler and Howard Hawks to John Ford. He was the first actor in history to win 3 Academy Awards for Best Supporting Actor: Come and Get It, 1936, Kentucky, 1938, The Westerner, 1940, and remains one of only 7 actors ever to have won more than twice in an acting category. During his golden years from 1935 to 1965, Brennan appeared in an average of 5 to 6 films per year, an astonishing record for a supporting actor. He became an indispensable face in classics like Sergeant York, My Darling Clementine, Red River, Rio Bravo, How the West Was Won, and The Far Country. At the height of his television career, The Real McCoys, 1957-1963, in which he starred, aired 224 episodes, achieved an average national rating of 25%, and made him America's favorite grandfather for 6 consecutive years. Beyond acting, Brennan led an artistic life few would have imagined. He released several country music records, and his song Old Rivers, 1962, reached the top 5 on the Billboard Hot 100, making him, at age 67, the oldest person at that time ever to enter the U.S. top 40. That hoarse, gravelly voice, once the result of wartime gas damage, gave him a singular place in American popular culture. He was awarded a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, 6501 Hollywood BLVD, and in 1970 was inducted into the Hall of Great Western Performers by the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, alongside John Wayne, James Stewart, and Gary Cooper. To audiences, Walter Brennan embodied the real America: honest, hard-working, and kind. He represented the moral backbone of a world where people believed in honor, in God, in work. On screen, he made people believe that kindness could heal, that even a toothless smile could warm the heart. But in life, he was a complex reminder that faith, if it does not evolve with its time, can become a chain. And perhaps that is why his legacy is more than just film. It is a lesson in humanity, that greatness lies not only in light, but also in the darkness one dares to face. He remains one of the rare artists who inspire both affection and unease. Affection for the gentleness he conveyed, unease for the fears that confined him. More than half a century later, his films still air every year on MeTV, AMC, and Turner Classic Movies, drawing over 20 million viewers annually. On that black and white screen, he still smiles, still the gentle old Westerner, still speaking in his hoarse, trembling voice. The best thing in life is to see others live right. It is a simple line, yet also the final manifesto of a deeply conflicted man. Walter Brennan, 3-time Oscar winner, over 230 roles, 5 decades in the craft, was not merely an actor, but a reflection of America's soul, part light, part shadow, and entirely real. There are those who make the world believe in goodness through their roles, but there are others who, through their lives, remind us that light only has meaning when we dare to look into the darkness. If this story made you think about the fragile line between good and evil, leave a quiet pause for the man who lived between 2 worlds. Walter Brennan. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe. For more cinematic journeys into the lives behind the fame. This is Hollywood Biographies, the light, the silence, the legacy.